Hello and welcome to Luke Salmon Books and Studios. My name is Luke, of course, and we are going to be building a website from scratch using very little libraries and using, of course, Haxe. As we've been doing in the last couple of videos, we have been working on the website. I did have a big break just to do a lot of the development off recording and get it up to almost completion. We're going to do some small changes here and there. I'm going to show you the website as it is currently and also work on building some kind of content management system. So stay tuned. We're going to go straight into it. Okay, so as mentioned in the intro, what I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to do some slight tweaks here and there just to make it a bit more professional, and then I'm actually going to work on refactoring some of the code that I've put in the backend into HaxeShare, and then start on the content management system. Now, this is what the website looks like so far. I've also made it mobile friendly, so when we move this about, you see this title resize, and the navigation becomes a menu that you can open and close like that. That's some basic CSS and some basic JavaScript as well going on there, so it's nothing fancy going on really. And obviously, as you can also see when we minimize, the columns are changing as well like that, and this becomes 50% instead of 33%, right? So if we were to, let's say, go to books, again, we've got this book. So we've got Age of Atlantis going on there, Sanya, right? And then if I were to minimize that, again, this table is becoming 100%. It's no longer floating, and also we've got all of the details just below it, and with projects as well. Obviously that doesn't look quite right, but that's just the way it is at the moment. I'm not sure if I should change the width of that actually. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure it'll be fine. But this is what it looks like at the moment. Obviously, there's no screenshots there because I haven't actually. Well, I've done some stuff with Persevere and Motivate. I just haven't put together any screenshots yet. But I would like to test uploading at some point. So that should, well, I'm sure I'll be fine. And then I've got an about page, and then the boring legal stuff, right? Obviously that's, I mean, I'm not collecting anything, so there's not much of a privacy policy in place, but terms of service, usual legal stuff. Ended up getting a template from somewhere that I paid for quite a long time ago. I just never got around to using it. So yeah, here we are. So this is what the website currently looks like. Even the search functionality is there as well. So I can just type in, basic, for example, and that comes up, as you can see. And there's also tags there. So I added tags. So as you can see, this website is coming along quite nicely. What I would like to do, however, on the homepage is actually put maybe a featured news page or something like that right at the very top that spans the entire width. So that might be something that I want to do pretty much straight away. So let's go ahead and test that and put that together. So going to the main page, now you're probably wondering, well, considering we're doing something like this, for example, so inside the backend, I'm generating a lot of HTML using the PHP side of things. Now, what happens if I wanted to test something and add some stuff to, say, a page? Well, there's one way we can do that. and we can do it by simply just telling PHP to generate for us a HTML page that we can use to actually design some extra stuff to it. So down here we've got page.print, right? Now so if I were to, let's say, if I were to define a compiler conditional where I say generate a test page that I can use to add stuff to and test to see if things work or not, what I could do is say, let's say I create a compiler conditional to say if generate, and then inside of the page file, which is here, what I could have is a function in here that actually generates the file for us. So what I could do is say, well, generate file or generate test file, let's say. And in here, all I'll do is say, well, let's just say something like file save content, and that's going to be in the root, followed by test.htm, right? Something like that. And I need to obviously put the actual content in there. So something like that, right? And then if I go back to here and say page.generate test file, and what I'll then do is compile that, and we can then actually generate something. Now I do need to actually add that, so what I'll do is, well, there's two ways we could do this. I suppose what I could do is just say -d generate here, and it will actually, and then it will generate the file. So if we take a look at this, so if we were to generate that, right, let's see, where's it gone? I might need to refresh file tree. No, where is it then? Should have generated it, right? But then I suppose I would need to technically refresh the page. So this is our test.htm, right? So if I were to, there's probably a better way to do that, actually, thinking about it. I should probably do something like that at compile time. So let's do that instead of doing it on page refresh. That would probably make a bit more sense. But I'll do that a bit later. I'll do that a bit later. But anyway, so we've got this page, and I want to test, let's say, this full screen thing that I was talking about. So down here, I've got this clear fix. So just below this clear fix, oops, just below this clear fix, what I'll do is actually have just a div class that is col12. I believe I've got a col12, I don't know. And then we'll have, say, a class, you know, box item, use item, and we'll have the same kind of thing, right? So image, news item test, something like that, right? Test news test featured item, something like that, right? And that's what it looks like. So if we were to go back here, that's what it looks like. And it might be a good idea to actually create a gap, perhaps, in between. So if I were to add a gap there, I already have that as a class. So that's our featured item. So we can then use that as part of the page that we like to feature on the news page. So how would I do that in practice? So what I would probably do is inside of HideSQL. So I've got news, as you can see. I've got this basic example which we just poured into that example if you just saw. So what I might do, so there's two ways I could do this. I could have a separate table that contains a featured news item linking to a specific ID, and then what I might do is then say, well, if we've already got a featured item, then I want to replace the existing featured item with the new one, right? Alternatively, I could just add a column here. And that is potential. Thing is, I don't know what would be more performant in the long run. But what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to put in a featured for the time being. I'm going to make that tiny int and a size of 1. And the reason I'm going to do that is because in Haxe, when we use something like sball and then we have something like true or false, what we will have is Haxe will generate a specific value out of true or false. So if it's false, it's going to be 0. If it's true, it's going to be 1, right? And this is what the sball type in Haxe will generate. The type, well, not generate, but it will use this match with the tiny int with the size of 1. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to move it just above visible. I think that would make more sense. So what I'm going to do now, so I'm making this not featured, right? So inside of here, I'm going to go up to news / item. Here we are. So here I've put a comment saying matching news. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to obviously say, well, I want to be able to get to these quickly using, as you just saw, the find functionality in Visual Studio Code. So now that I'm in here, I've got this item. Well, it won't be an item, it will just be in the normal news functionality, which would literally be down here, actually, thinking about it. Because it's on the home page, we're not actually matching anything. So down here, what we have is our categories. We've also got each news category. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, in fact, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here and I'm going to add the featured value. So I'm going to say featured sball. Now, this is where things get a little tricky, because what I want to do in here is say, well, I want to make sure that what we get back is not featured, right, for each category. Now, what I'd also like to do is get what's also featured. So let's say, for example, I have news featured, let's say. In fact, what I'll do is say featured like this, and I'm just going to iterate over each of those items that are featured and that have a date posted less than now. Okay, and it's also going to be visible, so just to make sure that as well. So it's also going to be visible. Okay, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to say date posted, order by, date posted, just as we saw. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to say, well, for I in 0 1 featured length. And the reason I'm saying 1 is because I want the 0th item to be used as the featured, but if there's any items that happen to also be featured, then we want to make sure that we set that feature to false. So what I'm going to do is say featured I dot featured is equal to false, and then I'm going to update them. Now this is technically not the best way to do it. Eventually what would be better is in the actual content management system that I'm going to make later on in the video. I'm actually going to check all this stuff in the content management system, and I'm going to be using something that you're probably not going to expect, and I'll explain why later on. But basically what I'd like to do is just make sure that any featured items that are already featured are set to false. I'll get rid of this a little later, but what I'd like to do now is just say, well, I've got the 0th featured item, and I want to mark that as the featured item at the top of the news page, as you saw here, right? This news item here. So set first featured item and display, or get first featured item and display. Okay, so let's get that first featured item. So I'm just going to say featured item is equal to featured.first, right? And what I've got is something called add HTML in this page. And what this is doing is it's looking for a key value like this, right? So these are what's called key values. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here. I'm going to navigate to news.html, and we've got these things here, right? Category navigation and category content. So this is what we're matching. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say just above category content is say featured item, because that's what we were looking at. And if I go to here, I don't want to use index.php because we were because that will clear everything that we just did. And that's why it's probably better to do it at compile time. But anyway, so what I'm going to do is say, well, page.html, I'm going to say featured item, and then I'm going to say in here, I'm going to use single quotes this time so that we can actually enter create new lines, and I'm going to copy and paste what I put in here, right in here. And in here what I'm going to do is say, well, this is our URL, right? So I'm going to put inside of here featured item dot URL, in here, I'm going to say featured item dot title, I believe. What's it complaining about? Array access is not allowed on. That was going to be the case, wasn't it? Can we not allow that anyway? I think. How do we do this? Just trying to think a minute. I guess what I would have to do is just iterate as normal, but ignore the first item. So I'm just going to say first is equal to true, and then I'll just say if first is equal to false, and then continue. Seems to be the only way to do it, but it would be nice to have the list iterable by default rather than having to access the iterator directly. But anyway, so down here again, what I'm going to do is put in here a paragraph tag, and just as I did down here, which was this marked down to HTML, and then obviously splitting it up by finding the last paragraph, the first paragraph ending tag, and then making sure we snip that off. So what I'm going to do is say featured text is that, right? So just get rid of that, and featured text can replace these like that, and that's going to refer to that. And inside of here, I'm just going to say featured text, right? So as mentioned, because we're asking for anything that's false inside of here, anything that is featured will display at the top, and anything that isn't featured will display in their respective categories, as you might expect. So what I'm now going to do is inside of here, I'm just going to comment that out. I believe that's just hash, yeah, or £sign if you're American, but I'm not American, so I'm going to say hash. And so what I'm going to do is well, let's just compile that for the time being. I'm going to just duplicate this row, duplicate row without keys, and I'm going to make this featured, and I'm just going to call this test featured. Test featured. Okay. So let's just make sure I've compiled that properly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually navigate to index.php, and I forgot something. I need to actually say parse HTML in order to actually parse all the values. So that will be featured item like that. Okay, build, refresh, and there we go. Okay, that's interesting. So we've got this. So we've kind of got it, but at the same time we've got this weird huge gap between here and here for some reason. So let's just take a look at the CSS and figure out what's going on there. Let me just double check something as well. So what am I adding here? So I've got news item and a paragraph text here as well. What am I doing down here? That again is just a box item with a news item as well. So that's interesting. I wonder what the generated code looks like. Oh. Oops. So, as you can see, what we've got is 2 paragraph items, which is not what we want. So that's probably what's causing the problem. So what I'm going to do is just get rid of that then, because obviously that's not needed. And I'm going to recompile that and check what that looks like. Yeah, that's much better. Now the gap seems to have also disappeared. So let's fix that as well. So inside of here and inside of, where is it? News HTML. Yeah. So I'm going to add that gap as I mentioned. And that'll just naturally work. Okay, cool. So that's our featured item at the top, and then we've also got our in each categories as well. And as you can see, because we have they're both in the same category, we're making sure that we're not getting we are only getting the first one that's featured and the other one isn't, right? And you know what, I'm actually going to change that date to something that makes a little more sense. 05, yeah, something like that. Refresh. Obviously nothing's changed. I've just changed the date. That's fine. Okay, cool. And let's just make sure nothing's changed there. Good. Okay, so that's the featured item. There is something else that I need to change, which is this button here at the moment. That's just saying, oh, search results for la-di-da-di-da, right? Who knew, right? And when we do the search, we want to make sure that we are parsing that correctly, as you can see. So again, when we make changes like this, we need to make sure that we check everything. So there's 2 things that we need to do in this case. So the first thing to do is to go up to our search functionality and make sure that new search, here we are. So we've got new pages / news items. So how many times are we using that? Using it 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we're using it quite a few times. So every time we're using that page, I want to make sure that I'm parsing that HTML and just basically removing it. In fact, I just want to parse the value. So this is, so I want to say featured item, right? And I'm just going to make that empty. And I'm going to do this in every case where I'm using page/news.html. Right. Page/news.html. Pages even. Okay, so I've got it in category. Do it here as well. Was I doing it already here? Nope. Okay. Let's do it there as well. And I think I already did it there. Okay. So inside of search then, what I'm going to do is in fact, yeah, I've already fixed that. So what I'm now going to do is I'm actually going to go to the client. I'm just going to switch that over to build.html to make sure that that works. And what I've got is, as you can see here, I've got the search input, and I'm encoding the URI of the value that we get from the search input. That's this text box here, right? So this text box has an ID of search input, and we're getting that value, we're encoding the URI, and we're adding it to the search value, and then we're navigating to it. So when we click this button, we want to do exactly the same thing. We're not going to add a ref or an anchor link. It's not going to be an anchor link anymore. We're just, well, I suppose we could keep it an anchor link. We just don't want the actual ref there. Yeah, I think that would be fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this and I'm going to put it into a function. So search. So I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to make that a static function. So I'm just going to say search there, right? That looks fine. And so the next thing I'm going to do here is say, well, let's just take a look a minute. So our A class search button, right? So that's what we want to check for. I am just going to get rid of this ref because we no longer need that now. So if I were to refresh now, if I were to hover over that now, it's still looking like a normal pointer, like we would as if we're hovering over this text input. So I want to change that just to make sure. So inside of my CSS file, I'm going to search for search button. I've got it here, and I'm just going to make sure that that cursor remains the same as you would think. So there we go. And what I'm now going to do is inside of here, I'm going to do exactly the same thing as above. I'm just going to use search button here. I'm going to say click. That's going to take a function, callback, and I'm just going to say search here as well. Okay. And then I'm going to build that. These are just warnings, it doesn't matter. It's still compiled. So what I'm now going to do is refresh. I might want to also build the server as well. So there we go. We've got our search results for nothing, and therefore we're getting all the news items, right? I mean, technically that's not correct, but we've got, let's say, our categories, for example. If we go back to home, we've still got our test features example. So let's search for something, test, and then I'll actually click this button instead of pressing enter, and it's, as you can see, working. Cool. So those are some of the basically refactors that I was thinking of doing in this tutorial video, and actually showing you exactly what was going on. So I've got now in here I've got this page and router, right? Let's just switch back to server to make sure that compiles properly. So the way this router works is it's not exactly the same as you might expect, and this is, again, it's using sort of like the switch statement format that I was talking about in the last video, right? So in the last video what I was talking about was the idea of object-oriented based routers versus just simple switch if statements. And the main reason why I feel this is the best approach is, I mean, a lot of people talk about scalability, for example, and they say, well, in order for code to be scalable, it needs to, make sense, and it needs to be readable, right? And that's what they mean by scalability. It needs to be readable, and it needs to be easily maintainable by a large team of people. And that's what they mean by scalability. Now, the problem with that argument is, well, first of all, why do you need so many people on a team to build a website? Surely if the fact that you have so many people using this cumbersome API, and because it's cumbersome, you need so many people. I mean, it's kind of ironic saying stuff like that, right? When you think about it, if you need so many people because you know the API that you're using is cumbersome and you need more and more people to keep up with the demands of the customer, well, first of all, perhaps you shouldn't be using the API in the first place, despite your tendency to say, well, it's scalable that because and this object-oriented style and the hierarchy that you've adopted into your code base means that it will help people understand what the code is doing. Well, that's one argument, sure, but the argument against that is, well, you can make stuff readable. It's not hard to implement a website, as we have seen here, without needing to go through the obsession of hierarchy. And I would go as far as to say, well, this is perfectly suitable for someone to come along and say, well, okay, so we're matching for search, we're matching this URL, right? Well, that makes sense, surely. And then as long as they understand, a library like record macros, they're going to look at this code and think, okay, we're getting all of the news categories, we're getting a file, pages/news HTML, we're iterating over each category, right? And then we're adding HTML, so we're replacing this with this. Okay, that makes sense, right? All of this stuff actually makes sense, right? And then you take a look at a monolithic library like Spring Boot in Java, and you're wondering, well, what does this all do? For a lot of people who understand Spring, it might make sense, but to me, even though I've actually gone ahead and learned it, I'm wondering, well, I'm still wondering to myself, how does this actually work? A lot of the aha moments is me thinking, okay, that's how it works, but where's the benefit exactly? Where's the benefit of using this API versus what I'm typing up here? And the practical benefits are just unseen. There's conceptual benefits, sure, but the practical benefits are just not there. And what I'm basically saying there is, conceptually, you have this hierarchy that's supposed to help people understand what the code is doing, but the practical benefit is just not there. There is no practical benefit. And there's, you can, I don't know whether you're understanding where I'm coming from, basically. I mean, there's, you do a lot of refactoring to make things easier for people, sure, but at the same time, how much refactoring do you really need to do to warrant any practical long-term benefit? And it's like, well, how much time do you want to waste refactoring code versus actually being productive, right? And that's basically the point I'm trying to make. And a lot of large teams spend more time abstracting code than they are actually improving features. And that's a very big problem, I feel. And I think that's something that needs to be solved in a lot of workplaces that do recruit hundreds of developers, and you're wondering why things like Twitter are still slow. So maybe developers need to think a little differently and stop obsessing over hierarchy and abstracting and refactoring, and just work with what you've got. Sure, do some refactoring when you absolutely have to do it, but don't obsess over it, is what I'm basically trying to get at there. Anyway, so even though that was a bit of a rant, I want to actually go ahead and start. I mean, I've done basically what I'm saying here is, in order to get all this stuff into HaxeShare, well, it's as simple as just copying and pasting. So if I were to open up Visual Studio Code again, and I go to HaxeShare, wherever it is, I can't remember where I put it now. Where did I put it? It's somewhere. Where? What? Oh, there it is. I was looking at the URLs. Okay, so in here, we've got all this request stuff, right? That's mostly helpful for things like what was I going to say? That's mostly helpful for JavaScript. But what I'm now going to do is in here, I'm going to say, well, I'm going to put our page and our get rid of that. That doesn't need to be there. And I'm just going to cut and paste. Right. So I'm just going to cut that. I'm going to paste it in here. And that up here, I'm just going to make that HaxeShare. It's complaining because it thinks we're not using PHP, but that's fine. So this is going to be more of a server-side thing anyway, so that doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to say if PHP or sys, I suppose, that doesn't really matter. And the same with the other HX file as well, which was router. So we've already got a router class, actually, thinking about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace all of this. So this is the object-oriented style that I was talking about in the last video. So I'm going to replace this now and use the alternative approach. And let's see. Where am I going? I don't know what I'm doing. Delete that. Right. And router. So again, we don't need that clearly. So you can see how simple this is versus what was there originally, right? So if I just come, in fact, let me replace that. So this is what it looks like currently, right? And sorry, this is what the procedural style that I'm looking at here, and this is the object-oriented style. You can see, right? You see the difference in complexity? It's so much, the object-oriented style is so much more complex than this, and actually this because it's so much simpler, it's actually easier to understand. I suppose it depends on your take on it. But I'm going to add some comments to this now as well. So what I'm going to do is cut this, and I'm going to put it inside of here. So I'm going to replace all of this. I don't care about it anymore. All of this execute root request. I'm not actually going to be developing my business management software in HTML5 or CSS3 anymore, as you probably saw. So I'm not bothered about what exists there anymore. So, I mean, this is very generic. It would work on any target. So in here, what I'm going to do is say, well, this is the router, and this is what's called the root. So what I'm going to do is say sets the URL of the router to check, right? Because we're checking a URL, and then we're saying, so param URL, the URL to parse and check, right? Something like that. Inside of matches, we're saying match each component of the URL passed into root divided by its slash. Increments the index of the root array when a match is found, right? And then the param value is the value to match against the URL, right? Inside of next, we're saying get the next value in the router. So what we're basically saying here is, well, if we match a specific URL, so if we were to go back to here and I go into the server, and let's just check and find somewhere where we're getting router next. So here, for example, in the search, we're saying router.next. Now this next is retrieving the next index in this match. So this is new/search. So the next value is going to be whatever is after the next slash. So that's this item here. So this is the value, right? So in a typical object-oriented router, you might have, let's say, a colon here, and then you match the value. Well, in this case, we don't need to do that. We just say router.next, and then we do whatever we want with that value. We determine what to do depending on what that value might be, right? So much easier than the object-oriented style. I'm just saying, you know, I'm not trying to be patronizing or anything. I'm just trying to demonstrate the difference between the two and why this approach, in my opinion, is a lot easier than the other one. But anyway, so going back to here then, so this is the get next value in the router, and this here is, well, we're saying check to find out if the URL has any more than how should I put this? Find out if the URL has a component after the current matching URL. So let's say, for example, you might have, say, news slash search, like I said, and then you might say, well, do we have a value after that? So we could check to see if there is in fact a value after search, and if not, we're just going to say, let's say it might be an invalid search query or something like that, and we could actually do that. But anyway, if we then say param add, which is optional, right? I just want to be clear that it is an optional parameter, and in here I'm going to say add a value to the number of components forward you want to check. Right, if that makes sense. And finally, in here, I'm just basically saying get a value to determine if the number of components in the URL is exactly as given. And then the param roots is number of component roots to check. Right. Hopefully that makes some sense. This page, I'll add some comments a bit later. I mean, it's not exactly, I say it's not exactly hard to understand. I've given you enough demonstration here, for example, instead of doing parse value like this, for example, where I'm saying, well, result is equal to result.replace. I mean, technically the way that Haxe replaces stuff is it basically just does this. It just does result.split key join value. That's literally all it does. And in fact, I would suggest that's probably slower than actually iterating across all the characters and finding the key and then replacing it accordingly. I think the split join is probably slower than that, I would suggest. So I might just implement my own replace function a little later, and not use string tools anymore, use my own string functionality. But anyway, I'll do that off recording. So now that I've done that, I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to start using the HaxeShare router. So in here, I'm going to say lib HaxeShare, and I do have that, I believe, and I don't really need it here. So what I'm going to do is inside of here, I'm going to say import HaxeShare dot page, and I'm also going to say HaxeShare dot router And did I not change that? No, I didn't. HaxeShare. Oops. There we go. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is get rid of the root. I don't need that anymore. And I will not need this anymore either. Okay. So I want to make sure this is all working, obviously. So what I'm going to do now is say compile. So that's still compiling properly. Everything is good. Okay. Now what I'd also like to do is actually start using this builder and start creating an API, REST API to actually connect to the database remotely and actually start using and use it as part of a content management system. So in here, so this could serve as perhaps a tutorial for HaxeShare. So in here, what I'm going to do is I've got all of these news categories, right? I've got all of this data here, book extra, news category, project, and product screenshot. But now what I'd like to do is actually start adding more stuff to it, but without having to do it every single time I want to add a class like this, for example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file called generator.hx. And this is going to be a macro context, right? So I'm going to create a class called generator. And in here, I'm going to say public static function build. Okay. Now, I'm going to import HaxeShare dot, and what I'm going to use is the builder from HaxeShare. And if we were to take a look at that, for example, this is a form builder, obviously. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for this. So this is the builder that we're looking at. And what this is going to do is it's going to generate a lot of stuff for us. Right. So we've got a router functionality, like here, for example, we've got all of these methods, and it's generating modify functions, right? If we go down here, again, we're building shared functionality and server functionality as well. So inside of the server, it's generating things like this, to type def function, and it's also generating a modify function somewhere as well. Where is that? Here, public static macro function finish, which is added, by the way, as a build metadata on here, right? So it's kind of complex what's going on behind the scenes. But all you really need to know is it's going to generate automatically for us some useful boilerplate stuff that we would otherwise have to do for both the client and the server, which is great. So what I'm now going to do is show you exactly how to use HaxeShare in your projects. So inside of here, I have builder.init. So that's the first thing we need to do. There is an init function, I believe, inside of here. It's been a while since I actually touched this code, so yeah, we've got this init function that's initializing everything, and it's providing us some simple stuff like this, for example. So we've got tiny text here, text, etc. Okay, so what I'd now like to do is start adding some fields and structures, right? Okay. So let's go back to here, and what I'm going to do is let's start with book, for example. So we've got this book, and I'm going to copy all of this, right? And I'm going to put I'm going to simply just put that in here. So I'm going to say builder.begin structure, and I'm going to call it book. Just exactly the name as the class that we had. Now inside of here we've also got what's called a field, which is of course these, right? What we had from our book here. So inside of, if I were to go back to the generator here, builder, we've got add field, which takes a type name, an identifier, an optional display name, and an optional searchable. We'll figure that bit out a bit later. So all I want to look at right now is the type name and the identifier, and that's quite simple. Now that it is a little limited, as you could probably see. So our type name is ID, and of course our identifier is simply just ID. We've also got another field, and that is title. No, it's not. It's short text, and our title is that. And I'm going to do the same for everything. Short text, your URL. I'm just going to copy that. That's art URL. Small text, yeah, that's the same. So synopsis, right? Here I'm just going to say Boolean. That's complete. I've got additional copyright. That's going to be the same. And finally, visible. And again, that's just going to be a Boolean. So let's build and then build like that. So what I'm now going to do, so I've got our one structure and I've got all of these fields that I've added. So what I'm going to do is inside of build-server, I'm going to say --macro and then server.generator.build. Okay. And what that's going to do is, because it's initialization context on the macro side of things, it's going to do all of this at compile time. Okay. And what that's going to do is it's going to go into HaxeShare and it's going to do all of this stuff. And when we call our build, it's going to build the shared file, shared values, which will generate for us type defs. And if we are in PHP context, which we will be, it will also generate some database objects as well. So to make sure that works, what I'm going to do is now delete this item. So I'm going to delete that and I'm going to compile. Oh, interesting. Interesting. Book. It cannot find the book. 2 seconds. I wonder what I'm doing. So I need to also just type in data.star in order for it to pick up the book, because the way that I'm doing it currently is because we've set up our folder structures with client and server being part of the same sort of project in a way. it's assuming that because it only generates the class within the scope of the data package, not server.data, if that makes sense. So we need to actually include that. This is a tiny text. Cannot access private field art URL. Well, that doesn't make any sense. It should be public. Well, I'm going to compile this. Cannot access private field. Huh. What? Why would it be private? I haven't seriously made it private, have I? Build server. Type fields. So we get our server type, we add the fields. That's the type def. Where's the actual values themselves? This is the server function. So what? I basically just copied and pasted from somewhere, didn't I? I think I literally copied and pasted from build shared and didn't properly test it. Okay. Did I seriously do that? I must have done. Huh. And yet somehow I managed to get it working on something else. I don't know. So basically what I need to do is have an access, which is a public here. How strange. But anyway, so yeah, we've got this type field that I want to add to the type, which is our class here, which is extending sys.db.object, as you can see there. That is weird that I did that. Okay, whatever. So there we go, we've got it building now. That is weird. I wonder why I never picked up on that. But anyway, so we know that's working, so now we can actually begin working on other things. So we can actually start going through all this. I'm not going to do it in recording, so I'm going to finish up here. So hopefully you kind of get the gist of how to use this. There's also something else called add REST route here, which we will also use as part of the REST API a bit later, but I'll work stuff like that out a bit later. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.